that's important thing to have. I think blogs can, by someone as professional as you, would be a good place to get good information.
I have a sidebar on the blog that lists a bunch of articles that I wrote about self-publishing, for self-publishing authors. And that's a good place to start if somebody is thinking about publishing their book, if they're approaching the end stage of writing it and they're thinking, what am I going to do with this now? Can I get a literary agent? If not, can I do this myself? Do I want to do this myself? That's a good place for people to read.
Okay, very good. Let's just talk about the design process now. The book is edited to your satisfaction, the author's satisfaction, everybody's happy. You have a product that's saleable, should be saleable. Now I want to take it to in the production stage.
Okay.
So
how much is it going to sell for? That's the first question that as a designer I need to ask. Because,
that's
sure, because that drives the cost. If I know what it's going to sell for, then I know how much money I have to work with for the printing. And if I know how much money I have to work with for the printing, I know how many pages and how big those pages are going to be. And that tells me, based on the length of the manuscript, how big the margins are going to be and how big the type is going to be. And I have to do all that before I even think about visually what do I want this to look like.
That's interesting. I would look at it from the other perspective. I'd say, who's the target market? What value do you bring? And then create the price for it. And then.
Well, yeah, but you're going to have done that before you tell me to start designing it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Once you tell me what that price. Once you go to the bookstore and find the books in your category and see what their quality is relative to yours.
Sure.
And what their price is and how big they are and what format they're in and what looks good and what doesn't look good, then you can come to me and say, I want to sell this book for $19.95, and I think I can sell 3,000 of them, so that's going to be what we're going to print. And most of the books I see are 6x9, and I'm going to say, okay, you want a 6x9 book because you want it to be on the same bookshelf with all your competing books, and they sell for $19.95, so you want yours to sell for $19.95, and you want it to be 6x9. That tells me enough to start. And then I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, what do I want to evoke subliminally in the reader? And typography, again, it has to be transparent. I don't want the reader to pick up the book and say, wow, I really like that typeface. That's the wrong answer.
Yeah.
You know, the right answer is, this author's telling me something interesting and I feel good about reading it. I don't want them to think why they feel good about reading it. I want to evoke that based on the cliches, really, of what fonts we associate with what kind of mood and what kind of material. Is this a book about 17th century France? Well, I'm not going to put a 20th century American typeface in there.
Sure.
Because you wouldn't notice why it seemed jarring, but it would be jarring. Is this a book about computer programming? Well, I'm not going to put a 17th century French typeface in there because you wouldn't necessarily understand why it bothered you a little, but it would bother you a little. And that's just because of cultural conditioning, because we've all been reading books for a long time, and this is one of the most traditional crafts there is. We kind of all think alike, all us typographers.
Although when I first look at a book, some books on the shelf, spine out, and particularly if it's a small spine and there's a long script on it, it's very difficult to read.
Very difficult to read.
And it may look nice on the cover and evoke that feeling of romance or whatever, but on the spine, if you have to spend a lot of time to try to read what the title is, you're probably not going to pick it up.
Yeah, a lot of people judge the cover design based on what it looks like face out and don't realize that that book is never going to be face out in the store unless they're paying the chain to have it face out. Yeah. So yeah, the spine is important, and it needs to be readable, and it needs to grab you.
How do you evoke emotion through typeface?
Again, it's cultural conditioning. You've been reading books since you were 4, 5. You've been looking at them since you were 2 or 3, and so have the rest of us. And we've all grown up in the same culture. Now, I couldn't necessarily be a successful book designer in China for the Chinese market. I wouldn't know how. Or maybe even in Germany. But I grew up in the U.S., You grew up in the U.S., and we're selling the books to people who grew up in the U.S. And so, as I said, it's a very traditional craft. I design books pretty much the same way people designed them 50 years ago and 75 years ago and close to 100 years ago. And you go before that, and things were a little different because the technology has changed so much. But we're all working with the same vocabulary of design elements, so it's fairly simple.
Okay. Are there rules in the sense, or
yes, lots of them.
Okay, so it's not necessarily it's art; it's more of a science.
Well, it's more left-brained than graphic design. In other words, I'm not an illustrator. If you want somebody who designs beautiful magazine spreads and award-winning advertisements, I'm not that person. Okay. I'm a book designer, so it is more left-brained. It's not, if you're looking for a designer, and you type designer in, and you get all these people who claim they're graphic designers, talk to them about your cover. Don't talk to them about the interior, because they're people who are sitting there with Macs. They're not really focused on words. They're focused on some graphic gestalt, and they're going to do a dynamite job for you on the cover. But a typographer is somebody who is looking at the inside of the book and trying to make it meet the economic requirements, be readable, and there are lots of rules associated with readability, sure. And be transparent. And so it's more analytic than the other kind of design, yeah.
What are some of the rules for readability?
Well, line length and leading, you don't want more than, well, you'd like to have your measure be 45 to 55 characters long. Economically, that turns out to be impractical these days, so you end up around 65. But you don't want to have 75 characters on a line, because then you're going to do, and then what happens is you get over to here, and then you have to jump back to the beginning of the next line, and because it's such a wide measure, you aren't quite sure, and maybe you read the same line twice, and maybe you go up a line, and maybe you go down 2 lines.
I've experienced that.
Okay, so that has to do with line length and the number of jumps, number of saccades that your eye makes across the line.
An 8.5 by 11 book will have a longer line length than 6 by 9, right?
Well,
unless you have 2 columns.
An 8.5 by 11 book is a big book, and typically it would have 2 columns, or it would have a text column and heads hanging off to the side. You'll see that in computer manuals a lot. Maybe the icons are over here, or some side heads, or some diagrams. Chemistry text or high school biology text will typically have 2 columns and lots of pictures.
We're really running short on time here, Dick. So what? Tell me everything you know about type in 2 minutes. No, I'm kidding. But I'm just thinking that just have the important thing in nonfiction, particularly. You have to be able to break up the type with subheads should you break up it, make it more more readable?
Sure, you want, because you're conveying facts in discrete units of information. You're not trying to lose the reader in your artificial world you've created and carry them, have them lost so that they forget to go to bed at night. In a nonfiction book, you're generally trying to convey information, and you want people to capture a chunk of information, process it in their heads, retain it, and then move on to the next chunk. So certainly you want to break it up as much as you can with, as you said, lists and subheads and graphical elements and diagrams and all those things.
In fiction, obviously, that's a lot less doable, but our time's up. You don't have time to answer that. That was a rhetorical question. Do you have any words of advice or any summary statement you'd like to leave with the audience?
I would like people